Abused adopted girl learns to forgive herself and love again. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I was standing in a courthouse bathroom in a white dress I'd bought on clearance, trying not to throw up into a sink that smelled like bleach, when my phone lit up with my mother's name for the first time in 3 years. Not my birth mother, Diane Hale. The woman who taught me that love could sound polished and still leave bruises you couldn't photograph. I just stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. My hands had already gone numb. Through the door, I could hear the low hum of people in the hallway, someone laughing, the click of dress shoes on tile. Eli was out there with the clerk and 2 friends. We weren't doing anything huge. No aisle, no flowers, no reception. Just papers, vows, lunch after. Exactly the kind of small, safe thing I had once believed I didn't deserve. Then the voicemail came in. "Nora," Diane said, her voice crisp, controlled, the same way it always sounded right before she ruined a room. "Your father collapsed this morning. Mercy West. If you have any decency left, you'll come before making another selfish spectacle of yourself." I played it twice, because trauma is humiliating like that. You listen again, as if maybe the second version will be kinder. It wasn't. My reflection in the mirror looked like a woman I almost recognized. 28. Hairpin back. Cheap pearl earrings. A body that had gotten good at looking calm, while the inside of it hit every alarm at once. I worked in the basement archives of our public library. I restored damaged records, labeled boxes, answered polite questions in a quiet voice. People liked me because I was dependable, which is what happens when you spend your whole childhood learning that taking up space is dangerous. Eli knocked softly. "Nora, you okay?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Because I loved him. That was the simplest, most terrifying truth in my life. I loved him enough to marry him, and some part of me still believed love was the moment before punishment. Diane had always been able to reach inside me and find the oldest wire. I should tell you that this didn't start with the voicemail. It started years earlier, in a beautiful house where everyone said I was lucky. Then my mother's voicemail turned that tiny room into a grave. From the outside, the Hale family looked like the kind people wrote Christmas letters about. My mother chaired fundraisers in navy dresses and pearl studs. My father served on the board of a local bank and shook hands like every conversation was a photo opportunity. My brother Caleb played baseball, then golf, then whatever other sport made adults say, "What a solid young man." We lived in a white 2-story house on a street lined with maple trees. Then there was me. I was adopted at 5, and Diane loved telling that story in public. She told it at church luncheons, charity breakfasts. "We knew she needed stability," she would say, resting one manicured hand between my shoulders like she was presenting a scholarship recipient. "Children need structure. We were happy to provide it." People looked at me with that admiration adults reserve for stories that flatter them. When I was little, I thought that meant I belonged. The first time I understood I didn't was over a Christmas card. I was 8. The photographer had us posed by the fireplace, Caleb in a red sweater, me in a dress that scratched my neck. I remember smiling too hard because Diane had warned me not to look lost. After the first few shots, she stepped forward and said in a whisper she assumed I couldn't hear, "Can you move her a little farther to the side? She photographs needy." Needy. I didn't know exactly what it meant then, only that the room changed after she said it. The photographer went quiet. Thomas looked down at his watch. Caleb rolled his eyes like I had done something embarrassing just by existing. Diane turned back to me with a bright smile and tucked my hair behind my ear. "Shoulders back, sweetheart," she said. "People can feel desperation." That was her gift. She could cut you open and call it grooming. After that, I started noticing the difference in measurements. Caleb spilled juice and got a napkin. I spilled milk and got a lecture about waste. Caleb could slam doors because he was spirited. If I went quiet for too long, I was sulking. Diane called me her blessing in public and her burden in private. I learned the price of belonging before I learned long division. Diane never had to scream to make me feel owned. Most of the time, she used gratitude. She used it when I asked normal kid questions. Could I go to a classmate's birthday party? Why did Caleb get to sleep over at friends' houses when I couldn't? Why did I have to call before practice ended, but he could wander in whenever he wanted? Every question came back like a bill. "We chose you," she would say, as if that sentence ended all others. One night when I was 11, A girl from school invited me to sleep over after her birthday party. I had never been to one. I waited until Diane was unloading groceries because timing mattered in our house. I practiced the words in my head. I even offered to clean my room first. She didn't answer right away. She just kept lining cans in the pantry with labels facing out. Then she said, "Girls with your background need consistency, Nora." I remember standing there holding a paper invitation with cartoon stars on it, trying to understand what my background had to do with pizza and a sleeping bag. "I'd be back tomorrow morning," I said. Thomas was at the table reading emails on his laptop. He didn't look up. "Your mother knows what's best." "But Caleb," Diane shut the pantry door a little harder than necessary. "Caleb is our son. You are also our responsibility. That means different things." Even now, I can feel the heat of that sentence in my face. I asked, very quietly, "Aren't I your daughter?" She turned then. Her smile was the kind that made my stomach hurt. "Don't be manipulative," she said. "Do you know how many children never get chosen? Do you know what we gave up to bring you here? And this is how you repay us? With attitude over a sleepover?" Thomas sighed, like I had interrupted something important. "Say thank you and drop it." Caleb leaned against the doorway with a smirk. "You always do this," he said. "They give you everything, and you act like a victim." That night, Diane made me write a page titled "Things I Should Be Grateful For." She checked it for tone. When I cried, she said tears were emotional blackmail. By 12, gratitude felt less like love and more like a leash. Every house has rules. Ours just pretended not to. No crying where people could hear. No asking why. No contradicting Diane in front of guests. No mentioning adoption unless Diane brought it up first and could shape the story. No telling teachers family business. No tone. No locked doors except hers. Most of these rules were never said straight out. You learn them by surviving the consequences. I learned them from the sound of Diane's heels in the hallway. From the way Thomas's shoulders tightened when her mood shifted. From Caleb, who seemed born understanding that the safest place in our house was anywhere blame wasn't pointing. When I was 13, I started my period in the middle of the night and bled through onto the guest room sheets. I had been moved into the guest room 2 years earlier because Caleb needed privacy. I scrubbed the fabric in cold water until my fingers hurt, but Diane found the spot. She held the damp sheet up between 2 fingers like it was evidence in court. "For God's sake," she said, "could you at least try not to be an ordeal?" "I'm sorry," I whispered. "You are always sorry. It never seems to improve anything." Thomas was standing in the doorway. He saw Diane make me strip the bed while she listed the cost of detergent, mattresses, dry cleaning, dignity. He saw me shaking so hard I couldn't get the fitted corner back on. He saw Caleb walk past, glance in, and keep going. Nobody stopped it. Afterward, Diane handed me a trash bag with the stained pajamas inside. "Wash these separately," she said. "And don't leave the bathroom looking disgusting." Another silent rule. Anything my body did naturally became proof that I was too much. Too messy. Too emotional. Too needy. Too loud when I cried. Too quiet when I shut down. I learned to pad every sentence with apology. I learned to eat standing up because sitting at the table invited comments. I learned to keep a backpack hidden under the bed with socks, a granola bar, and $27 from babysitting, because some part of me was always waiting to be told to leave. Silence became the only language that ever kept me safe. I moved out at 21 with 2 duffel bags, a secondhand mattress, and a belief that if I became useful enough, maybe life would finally stop feeling like an audition. It didn't. By 28, I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. I worked in the local library's archives room, where damaged records came to me curled, torn, watermarked, and I got to fix what paper would let me fix. I liked the quiet of it. Documents made sense. A missing page was a missing page. Mold was mold. There was comfort in problems that stayed on the surface. People said I was independent. What they meant was that I never asked for anything. I apologized when cashiers handed me the wrong change. I kept my fridge half empty because abundance made me nervous. I slept with my phone under my pillow and woke at every sound in the hallway. If someone bought me coffee, I found a way to repay them before the day ended because gifts had always come with inventory. I said, sorry, so often my therapist, Dr. Mara Bennett, started counting on her fingers until I stopped mid-sentence and laughed. That, she said gently, is not politeness. That's survival. Eli lived across the hall. He was a paramedic, the kind of person who moved with steady purpose even when he was tired. We met because my bathroom sink broke at midnight, and he heard me fighting with the shut-off valve through the wall. He knocked, fixed it in 10 minutes, and refused the $40 I tried to press into his hand. "You don't have to pay me for being your neighbor," he said. I left banana bread at his door with a note that said, "Thank you for the sink. Sorry about the noise. Sorry about the banana bread." He knocked later holding the note and smiling like he'd found something both funny and sad. "You apologize in writing too?" I wanted to tell him that in my house, even gratitude had to be pre-approved. Instead, I shrugged. We became careful friends, then something softer. He never pushed. He noticed when I flinched at raised voices in restaurants. He noticed I folded into myself whenever anyone praised me. He noticed I never once used the word home for where I lived. Even kindness felt dangerous when your whole body expected the bill. Eli and I had been together almost 2 years when we decided on the courthouse wedding. No aisle to walk. No room full of faces evaluating whether I looked grateful enough, pretty enough, stable enough. Just paperwork, vows, and lunch at a diner afterward with 2 friends from the library and Dr. Mara, who had hugged me so hard when I invited her that I almost cried in her office. I thought Small would feel safe. Then Diane called. After I came out of the bathroom, I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. Eli took one look at me and guided me to a bench in the hallway without touching me anywhere I couldn't see. That was one of the first things I loved about him. He always let my body know what was happening. "What do you need?" he asked. The honest answer was, I needed to be 10 different women instead of the one I was. I needed to be the kind who could delete the voicemail and keep walking. The kind who didn't still hear obedience in her mother's voice. The kind who didn't feel guilty for wanting joy while someone from her old family was sick. "I think my father's in the hospital," I said. Eli crouched in front of me. "Okay." My mother said if I had any decency. My voice broke on the word. I hated that it still had power. He didn't say, "She can't do this to you." He didn't say, "Ignore her." He just asked, "Do you want to go?" Nobody had ever asked me that before. Growing up, the question had always been, "What are you supposed to do?" Wanting was considered suspicious. I nodded because shame is efficient. We postponed the ceremony and drove to Mercy West. Thomas was awake when we got there, pale but stable. Diane stood beside the bed in lipstick and pressed slacks like illness had interrupted a luncheon, not a life. Caleb was there too, scrolling his phone. "There she is," Diane said. "You made quite an entrance." Thomas looked at me, then at the white dress under my coat. "You were really going through with it?" Before I left, Diane thrust a storage box into my arms. "This was in the attic," she said. "School papers, junk, whatever sentimental clutter you left behind. Take it. We're simplifying." At the bottom of the box, one unopened envelope had my name. I carried that box into my apartment like it might explode. Eli set it on my kitchen table and didn't ask to look inside. He made tea instead, the strong kind he drank after night shifts. He moved around me carefully, not like I was fragile, just like I was real. I kept staring at the envelope. The paper had yellowed at the corners. My full name was written in blue ink, not Diane's sharp slanted handwriting, not Thomas's block letters. It was postmarked 16 years earlier. "You don't have to open it tonight," Eli said. I laughed, but it came out thin. "You say that like not knowing is an option." He leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Nora, I think you've been surviving on not knowing for a long time." That sentence landed harder than I expected. I sat down and looked at my hands. My mother always said no one from before wanted contact. Before, my biological family. I swallowed. She said there wasn't anyone safe. That they were gone, or uninterested, or both. The story changed depending on the audience. Eli stayed quiet. I don't know why that made it easier, but it did. Maybe because silence in my apartment never felt like punishment with him. So I told him things I had never said in one uninterrupted line. The speeches. The inventory of every dollar spent on me. The way Diane could make a normal childhood need sound like extortion. The fact that Thomas never seemed cruel enough to blame, which had somehow made me blame myself more. I told him how I still froze when older women used a certain tone. How I still hid wrappers at the bottom of the trash because Diane used to comment on what I ate. How getting married had felt beautiful right until that voicemail reminded me I had never really left. Eli's face changed little while I spoke, but I saw grief move through it. When I finished, he said, softly, "None of that sounds normal." I started crying so fast it embarrassed me. No one had ever said it that plainly before. Not dramatic. Not unfortunate. Not complicated. Not she did her best. Just not normal. My fingers trembled on the envelope flap. When I finally opened it, my childhood split cleanly in two. Inside the envelope was a card with a faded watercolor flower on the front and 3 pages folded so neatly they looked handled, reread, and handled again before they were ever sealed away from me. The letter was from my mother's sister. She didn't use the word "and" in the first line, probably because she didn't know whether she was allowed to. She wrote, "My name is Elena. I am your first mother's sister, and I have been trying to reach you for almost a year. I don't know what you have been told, so I will only tell you what is true. You were loved before you were lost." I had to put the paper down after that. My eyes stopped tracking. Diane had always told the story the same way in private. Your mother was unstable. There were no safe relatives. No one came. No one asked. We were the only ones willing to take on the mess. That story built the entire architecture of my life. It explained why I had to earn everything. Why gratitude was mandatory. Why I should feel lucky even when I felt small. But Elena's letter talked about phone calls that weren't returned. Packages sent back unopened. A birthday card mailed to the agency after Diane refused to give her our home address. She wrote that she had photographs of my first mother laughing in a sunflower field, letters she wanted me to have, a blanket I used to sleep with as a toddler. She wrote, "If they have told you that no one wanted you, please do not believe that lie for one more day." At the bottom of the box, underneath old report cards and a cracked recorder from middle school, I found another envelope. This one was addressed to Diane from the adoption agency. I wasn't proud of reading it. I'm also done apologizing for opening documents that were about my life. It was a contact log. 3 attempts from Elena. 1 denied visit request. 1 note in typed black ink. Adoptive mother states contact is destabilizing for child. Adoptive father agrees. Agrees. I remembered being 13 and asking Diane, while she folded towels, whether anybody from my first family had ever tried to find me. She didn't even look up. "Nora," she had said, tired and dismissive. "If someone wanted you, they would have shown up." The first lie was small enough to hold, and impossible to survive. Once the lie had a shape, I couldn't stop looking for its edges. The next week I requested every record the state would legally release to an adult adoptee. I told myself it was administrative, that I was only gathering paperwork the way I gathered damaged census books or water-stained deeds in the archive. But my body knew better. I barely slept. I jumped at every unknown number. I started checking the mailbox twice a day like my life might arrive in installments. Dr. Mara helped me slow down enough to read without drowning. "You are not reopening the wound," she told me in her office, while I twisted a tissue to pieces in my lap. "You are finally being allowed to see it." The packet came in a thick manila envelope with my name typed across the front. Inside were evaluations, court summaries, case notes, and the kind of official language that can disguise cruelty as procedure. I learned my maternal aunt had not only asked for contact. She had once filed for kinship consideration before my adoption was finalized. A home study had been started, then suddenly closed. There was also a school report from 3rd grade. My teacher had documented heightened anxiety around dismissal, frequent apologizing, hoarding food in a desk cubby, and flinching when corrected. She recommended that the school counselor meet with me privately and noted concern about fear-based compliance. Underneath was a response from my parents. Diane's note was exactly what I expected: polished, offended, dismissive. "Nora has a vivid imagination. We have worked very hard to give her structure." What stopped my breathing was the paragraph below it. Thomas had added his own statement. He wrote that I had a history of manipulative attachment behaviors, that I fabricated mistreatment when redirected, and that further school interference would reward attention-seeking narratives. His signature sat at the bottom in calm blue ink. For years I had split my parents into categories so I could stay sane. Diane was the blade. Thomas was the wall. One cut, one failed to protect. That was easier to live with than the truth. The truth was that he had seen fear and turned it into evidence against me. Then I found the page my father had signed himself. A few days after the records arrived, Diane texted me as if we were women who exchanged neutral errands. "Your father is home. Family dinner Sunday at 6. Don't be theatrical." I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Every muscle in my body knew exactly what Sunday dinners used to cost. But Thomas had been discharged, Caleb would be there, and some old reflex still translated summons into duty. I told Eli I would just stop by for an hour. He didn't argue. Text me when you want out, he said. Not when you think you should leave. When you want out. The house looked the same. White columns. Blue hydrangeas. The brass knocker Diane polished every season. I stood on the porch with the adoption packet in my bag and had the humiliating sensation of being 14 again, checking my expression before entering. Diane opened the door and looked me over once, from shoes to hair. You cut your hair, she said. Hello to you too. She stepped aside. Try to keep tonight peaceful. Your father doesn't need stress. Inside, Caleb was opening wine. Thomas sat at the head of the table wrapped in cardigan softness, thinner than I had ever seen him. For one dangerous second, pity almost rewrote everything. That was the problem with families like mine. Harm rarely arrived looking monstrous. Sometimes it wore reading glasses and post-hospital fatigue. Dinner moved like old choreography. Diane served, Caleb joked, Thomas talked about medication and follow-ups. I found myself clearing plates before anyone asked. I laughed in the right places. When Diane dropped a fork, I bent automatically to pick it up. My body remembered submission faster than my mind could object. Then Caleb said, So, are we pretending the courthouse drama didn't happen? I froze. Diane dabbed her mouth. Your timing has always been unfortunate, Nora. Thomas sighed. Your mother was worried. Worried, I said. She told me I had no decency. You're too sensitive, Caleb muttered. There it was. The old room. The old script. I felt myself shrinking to fit it. I almost swallowed the truth again because weakness can look so much like innocence. I got home from dinner shaking with the kind of rage that makes your teeth hurt. Eli was sitting on my couch in socks, half watching a baseball game with the volume low because he knew I hated sudden noise. He muted it the second he saw my face. I did it again, I said. I went small. He stood, but waited for me to close the distance first. You went there, he said. That's not small. While Eli heated leftovers, I wasn't going to eat. I kept reading through the adoption packet and the school records, this time past the pages I had stopped on before. At the back of the school file was a stapled memo summarizing a call between the counselor and my father after the counselor suggested family therapy. Devastating truths don't always arrive in dramatic language. Mine arrived in neat paragraphs written by a man who balanced checkbooks and donated to food drives. Thomas told the counselor that my history of abandonment made me prone to false accusations, that Diane's discipline was being misunderstood, and that outside intervention would threaten attachment and destabilize the home. He requested that all future concerns be routed through him, not Diane, to avoid emotionally escalating the child. The child, me. At the bottom was a handwritten note from the counselor. Father appears informed and credible. Will defer unless new evidence emerges. That was the worst part. He hadn't merely watched. He had managed the story. He had taken Diane's cruelty and wrapped it in respectable language until other adults mistook my fear for pathology. When I cried, I was manipulative. When I went quiet, I was withholding. When I begged not to go home after school, I was dysregulated. For years I had protected him in my mind because someone had to remain salvageable. I told myself he was weak, not willing. Passive, not cruel. But passivity doesn't write memoranda. Passivity doesn't intercept help and call it stability. When I showed Eli the page, he read it once and set it down very carefully. I'm sorry, he said. The parent I called safe had been writing the script all along. I asked them all to meet me the following Thursday. I said I needed to return a few things from the attic. Diane sounded irritated but curious, which in our family was close enough to agreement. Caleb came because Diane told him to. Thomas sat in his leather chair by the window like he expected the whole thing to be tiresome. Eli drove me there and waited outside because I wanted one final chance to speak without a witness they could blame. Before I got out of the car, he touched the back of my hand and said, You do not have to be calm to be credible. That sentence carried me through the front door. I didn't sit. I laid the documents on the dining room table one by one. My aunt's unopened letter, the agency contact log, the teacher's report, Thomas's statement, the counselor memo. Paper makes a specific sound when it lands on polished wood. I will probably hear it in my head for the rest of my life. Diane didn't even read the first page all the way through. You went through private files? They were about me. They were our responsibility. No, I said, and my voice shook. I was your responsibility. My life was not your property. Caleb picked up the contact log. What is this supposed to prove? That someone asked for me. More than once. That you both lied. Diane gave a small laugh. Your first family was chaos. We spared you confusion. You told me no one wanted me. We wanted you. As what? I snapped. A daughter? Or a story you could control? Thomas finally spoke. Nora, these documents are out of context. I looked at him. You told a school counselor I fabricated mistreatment. His eyes flickered. You were struggling. I was afraid. Diane folded her arms. You have always been dramatic. That's the word you use whenever truth is inconvenient. Then she reached for her final weapon. After everything we gave you, I surprised myself by not crying. You gave me a last name and then charged interest, I said. You taught me to confuse obedience with love. You don't get to call that generosity anymore. For once, I didn't leave carrying what belonged to them. Nothing cinematic happened after the confrontation. No vase shattered. No one fell to their knees and admitted the whole architecture of my childhood had been built on vanity and fear. Real life is less generous than that. Diane called twice and left one voicemail telling me I was cruel to attack a recovering man. Thomas sent a single email that began "I'm sorry you were hurt" and ended with "we did what we thought was necessary." Caleb texted, "You're blowing this up because you need someone to blame." Then, 3 hours later, he texted again. Did Mom really keep those letters? That second message told me more than the first. The lie didn't collapse all at once. It cracked in private places. Caleb stopped sounding certain. His wife, who had never once contacted me directly before, sent, "I'm sorry. I believe you." Dr. Mara said belief from others can help, but the real turning point is when you stop cross-examining yourself. She was right. The loudest shift happened in me. I blocked Diane's number the same night. She called me ungrateful. I made Thomas communicate only by email and then stopped reading most of those too. At work, I was useless for a week. I mislabeled a box of tax ledgers, cried in the staff bathroom when a coworker asked if I was okay, and nearly canceled 2 therapy appointments because some old reflex still insisted I was making too much of everything. But freedom is clumsy at first. It limps. It second-guesses. It checks the locks twice and still feels guilty. Eli changed my emergency contact form while we were sitting at my kitchen table paying bills. He slid it over and said, "Only if you want." I stared at the blank line for a full minute before writing his name. That tiny act undid me more than the confrontation had. Trust, I learned, is not grand. Sometimes it is simply deciding who gets called if your car skids in the rain. For the first time in my life, the family story existed without my cooperation. Diane could tell her church friends I was unstable. Thomas could call me unforgiving. Caleb could sit in the middle until it became uncomfortable. None of it changed the documents. None of it changed what my body had known for years. The house that made me small no longer got to define my size. Healing was not one revelation followed by peace. It was humiliatingly ordinary. It was learning how to buy groceries without apologizing to the cashier for taking too long. It was letting unopened mail sit on the counter for an hour without assuming it contained punishment. It was noticing how often I said "it's fine" when I meant "I'm scared," and trying again. Dr. Mara taught me language I had never been given as a child. Hypervigilance, scapegoating, conditional attachment, trauma response. At first those terms felt clinical and cold. Then they started to feel merciful. Naming a wound is not the same as living inside it. Sometimes it is the first door out. One afternoon she asked, "What if the shame doesn't belong to you?" I laughed because it sounded impossible. Then I went home and found myself standing in my kitchen repeating the question out loud like it might unlock something. What if the shame doesn't belong to you? What if the problem was never that you were too needy, too sensitive, too hard to love? What if those were just words handed to a child so the adults wouldn't have to face themselves? I began doing small things on purpose. I left dishes in the sink overnight and didn't call myself disgusting. I bought the expensive peaches once because I wanted them, not because I had earned them. I let Eli see me cry without turning my face to the wall. When he brought me soup after a late shift, I said thank you and did not race to repay him in cash, labor, or apology. There were harder things too. The first time he reached for my hand while we walked past a church fundraiser, I almost pulled away out of old instinct. Instead, I took a breath and kept holding on. My body needed repetition before it believed what my mind was learning. not every closeness ends in death. A few months later, I read my aunt's letter again, this time without dissociating halfway through. I cried for the years I lost. Then I cried for the little girl who had believed absence meant defect. That grief felt different, cleaner. It did not accuse me. The day I stopped calling myself difficult, breathing got easier. We didn't get married on the day of the voicemail. For a long time, I was ashamed of that. It felt like failure, like proof that Diane could still reach across years and ruin anything soft. But Eli never treated it that way. He told people, truthfully, that we postponed. He never called me dramatic. He never used patience like a performance. He just stayed. A year later, on a bright Friday in October, we went back to the same courthouse. This time I wore a cream sweater instead of a dress, and the hallway still smelled faintly like bleach, and my heart still beat too fast when the elevator doors opened. Healing had not turned me into someone fearless. It had turned me into someone who no longer mistook fear for prophecy. Dr. Mara came. So did two library co-workers and Eli's sister. No one asked me to smile correctly. No one adjusted my shoulders. No one called me lucky for being chosen. I stood beside a man who had never once demanded that I prove I was worth loving. And when the clerk asked if we were ready, I heard my own voice answer yes without apology. Afterward, we ate grilled cheese and tomato soup at the diner across the street because that had been the original plan, and I liked the symmetry of rescuing something that used to hurt. Eli reached across the table and touched my wrist. You know, he said, you never had to earn this. Once, a sentence like that would have made me suspicious. That day it made me cry and laugh at the same time. I still have hard mornings. I still sometimes hear Diane in my head when I make mistakes. I still have to remind myself that asking for comfort is not manipulation and that love, which requires self-erasure, is not love at all. But I know this now with a steadiness I did not have before. Being treated like a burden does not mean you were one. Being unloved correctly does not make you unlovable. Sometimes the holiest thing you can do is return shame to the people who handed it to you and keep walking.